Everyone who meditates at some point has this same revelation. Sometimes when we look at a newborn baby or an exquisite sunset, there's something about that experience that takes us out completely of ourselves. And it's like we glimpse superconsciousness. And then we discover that in meditation or practicing pranayama or yoga asanas or devotional chanting, that moment, that feeling comes back to us, that same feeling. And then we realize that that feeling is also under our control. We can do a little bit of spiritual practice, and that experience can come to us. We realize that reality is not just about what we can perceive with our five senses. In fact, the inner realm seems like it's more real than the physical world. And then automatically some of our priorities begin to shift a little bit. Maybe we appreciate silence. Maybe we're not afraid to be alone, but we enjoy being alone. Maybe we depend less on pleasures, on friends, on family to give us a sense of our own well-being. And at this point, some people even are tempted to reject the world entirely. And when just before Swami Kriyananda met his guru, he had made plans to become a hermit in the jungle. But his guru corrected him. He said, "Your life is destined to be one of intense activity and meditation." And very few people could or should leave the world and become hermits. Their samskars, their desires would pull them back into the world. And most likely, our Dharma is one of intense activity and meditation. Sri Krishna tells Arjuna that he must act, and we too must act. At the same time, within the framework of living in the world, we should take every opportunity we can to develop this inner world, to develop devotion, to cultivate inner awareness, to meditate deeply, to develop joy in our hearts. Because we've spent a lifetime developing our outer life, influenced by the selfish motives that we see on television, advertising, other people's opinions. And now we need to start balancing that with developing this inner part, this more real, this more true part of our own nature. This inner life that's based on high ideals, that's based on truth. My first 10 years with Ananda Sangha was in our monastery. And in that time, during the day, I worked hard serving, but then mornings, evenings, they were just for God. They were for meditation, for study, for satsang. I had the freedom of not having house or marriage or family to take care of. And I stayed in a very small, very simple, very small caravan trailer. And then after some years, I added 4 tiny bedrooms to that so 4 of us could live together. But in all that time, we never had an indoor toilet or bath. And now Ananda has several monasteries, and for some people it's a lifelong decision. But for most, like me, it was a choice of a period of intense training, a period to dedicate ourselves to the spiritual path and have the freedom not to have other major obligations. And this also became a preparation for marriage, for everything that life brings to us. Yoganandaji would urge everyone who was not already married, he urged them to have this kind of period of spiritual training, of study, and how it need not interfere with our job, with our studies, but that it gives us that balance, the inner versus the outer. But also all of us need to move from the outer to the inner to give us that balance. And in one way, to take this journey from outer to inner by way of example, in the energization exercises, we work with the outer. We work with physical energy. We learn to control energy. We direct that energy into the spine. In meditation, we raise that energy in the spine. In affirmation, like we just did, we repeat the affirmation in a loud voice to capture the attention of the conscious mind. Then we say it more softly, in a whisper, to plant that seed in the subconscious. And then just silently, feeling like we're offering it up into superconscious and having that experience. In another example, Yoganandaji said that he spiritualized the chants that he wrote. He sung each one over and over, more and more deeply, until he had actual contact with God through chanting. He said, "You should chant these songs alone or with a group, with ever-increasing devotion and fervor. After the notes are learned, one's undivided attention should be given to repeating them with deeper and deeper devotion, striving to fully understand the meaning of the words, until one is immersed in the joy of singing, which is the first perception of God." And so, like the affirmation, he says to sing the chants first loudly, clap your hands, then in a whisper, and then only mentally. We have the chant book to understand the words, to understand the meaning, to follow. And we sing in a loud voice to attract the conscious mind, singing in harmony with other devotees. And then Yoganandaji says, in subconscious chanting, the mind automatically repeats the chant in the background of thought and activity. Then, holding the attention unbrokenly on the vibration of Om, is the beginning of real superconscious chanting. Words that are saturated with sincerity, conviction, faith, and intuition are like highly explosive vibration bombs. It's so colorful, his expression. are like highly explosive vibration bombs, which have the power to explode the rocks of difficulties and create the change desired. And so from outer to inner, this voyage that we all must make, through activity, we can reach to inner communion. It's accessible to all of us, and it's my wish for you. Thank you.
Activity versus inner communion is an age-old debate between all spiritual religions. There's always those who are feeling more outward in their service and in their spiritual life, and there's others that want to go deep inside and just experience God inside. And in the monasteries of all religions, I'm sure they have these arguments. The more contemplatives are always arguing with the busy ones, saying, you need to be quiet, you need to feel God within. And the very active ones say, you need to get off of your seat and start helping me. And so this is an age-old debate. And this debate is also discussed in the Bible. Many of you must know the story of Mary and Martha. We usually tell the story about once a year. So for those of you who have been around for a while, I'm sure you've heard this story. But Jesus and his disciples, on their way to Jerusalem for the Passover, not long before Jesus was crucified, they stopped by Mary and Martha's house, which is also the sister of Lazarus, who you probably know the name there. Anyway, they stopped by, and surely Jesus had a following of disciples with him, and they stopped by, and it was mealtime. And Jesus came in, and Mary, just so grateful to see her guru again, sat at his feet and just started an inner communion with Christ, and just sat there in meditation, just attuning to his vibration, attuning to his wisdom, to his light. And in the meantime, Martha, the sister, was in the kitchen, frantically trying to put a meal together for the disciples and for Jesus. At one point, Martha said to Jesus, Jesus, what are you doing? How come you aren't telling Mary to come and help me in the kitchen? Look at all this work there is to be done. And Jesus said, Martha, Martha, you are careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful, and Mary has chosen the higher part. Mary is making the right decision. Mary is attuning her consciousness with me. And so this, of course, is a very famous story in the Bible, and as in all scriptures, it's also an allegory and relates to each one of us, because each one of us has these different parts of Mary and Martha, and even the Christ consciousness within, Kutastha Chaitanya. We have this soul who is already one with God, already merged with God within us. And then we have this very restless side that is always sort of nervous, looking around for validation, worrying about money, worrying about our health, worrying about things. And then we also have this side of our soul nature that just wants to commune with that higher self with us. So this kind of debate is always going on within us. And also if you look at the Gita, it's the same thing. You've got Krishna, you've got God consciousness there, you've got the Pandavas and the Kauravas. The Pandavas are the higher side of our soul nature, wanting to commune with Krishna, to be one with Krishna, to win the battle. And you've got the Kauravas that are just trying to pull you down into ego consciousness, into subconsciousness, and all of these restless, worldly, bad citizens and traits that are sort of always at battle with our good citizens, with our higher qualities. And so you've got this ego nature versus soul nature, and it's always going on, this debate inside of us. And so we have to say, well, which one should, obviously we want to move towards our soul nature, but then isn't there service to be done? Isn't there outward activity to be done? What should I choose? How should I choose this? We know, as Keshava was just saying, that that Swamiji was told by his guru, your life will be one of intense activity and meditation. But he said intense activity first. And we know that all of these gurus have led lives of intense activity. I'm not sure about Babaji, actually. Babaji might have been sitting still for a very long time. But, Lahiri Mahashaya went up to the Himalayas, brought Kriya Yoga back down to the city. He wanted to stay in inner meditation, but Babaji said, no, you already have a job, you already have a family, go back, share Kriya Yoga with the world. So Lahiri had an intense activity. Sri Yukteswar, I don't know if it was quite as intense, but he had to train his disciples. He had to train Yogananda to go to the West. Yogananda was given the job of bringing meditation to the West, which was a pretty big job, and he had a very intense activity life, but he was always in communion with God at the same time. So if Krishna's soldiers are like Krishna and we are Yogananda's disciples, I think that we are in an array of intense activity and service, but also meditation. And Yogananda said we need to be calmly active and actively calm. In our activity, we need to remain in our center and calm. In our meditation, we cannot be falling asleep. We need to be active, awake, aware, our energy rising up, uplifting consciousness. And in that uplifted consciousness, be channel of light, be channel of spiritual vibrations to this world. So at Ananda, I think we do have a life of intense activity, but with that spiritual consciousness. Somebody needed to make the dinner in that house. Martha thought it was her job, but what could Martha have been doing? Martha could have been listening to Christ from the kitchen. She could have been so filled with joy that Christ was in her living room and that she was able to serve in that way and attuning to her consciousness. But she wasn't. She was worried, she was fretful, and she was troubled about many things, and therefore Jesus rebuked her. She did not have the right attitude. And so what is the right attitude when we're serving? It is taking the Mary, taking those higher vibrations of communing with God. We're taking the spiritual consciousness that we receive in meditation, and we're bringing it out to our service. There's actually a continuation of this story. So they all have dinner together, and after dinner, Mary pulls out this very expensive oil called spikenard and starts washing Jesus' feet with this very expensive oil and washing it with her hair. And Judas, who we already know, is a kind of a fallen disciple in the scripture there, but he says to Jesus, "This is very expensive oil. How come we didn't go sell this oil for 300 pence and give it to the poor?" Because Jesus has been serving the poor. Jesus has been feeding the poor. He's been healing the sick. He's been serving all the lower class people of the whole area. So Judas knows that they live a life of service. So why wasn't this oil sold? And Jesus says to Judas, "She has been keeping this oil to use on me when I'm buried," because he's predicting that he's soon to be leaving the body and to be crucified. She's been keeping this for the day of my death. But the poor you have with you always, but me you don't always have with you. And what is his meaning there? His meaning is that in deep spiritual communion with God, we have this smriti. Our souls know this is our true nature. And sometimes it feels so much like our true self that we can just get up from our meditation really quickly saying, okay, now I can go on with my day because I know I had this peace. I'm used to this peace. I remember this peace. But he's saying when you have these deep experiences, this communion with Christ, with Krishna, with your highest self, treasure those moments. Hold on to that vibration and hold on to it as long as you can and take it with you out into your day and serve with that vibration, because that doesn't always come. And that you need to look for in your meditation. You need to have as your highest dharma. He's saying the poor you have always with you. He was serving the poor. He wasn't saying that service isn't important and upliftment of mankind isn't important. But what he's also saying is that in the world, mankind is in bondage to delusion. As long as delusion is the normal state of mankind, there will be inequality, there will be social injustice, there will be the poor. As long as mankind is in delusion. But how can we serve mankind? We can change our consciousness. We can hold on to that oneness with God, to that spiritual consciousness. It's the only way we can change the consciousness on the planet. So Jesus is saying, and Krishna is saying in the Gita, you need to act, you need to serve, but look at your consciousness first. The way in which you serve, what you're vibrating, what you're channeling as you go about your daily life, whether it's making dinner, serving the sick, out in the corporates, with your family, whatever your dharma is, it's not what you're doing that's important. It's the consciousness with which you're doing it. Our highest dharma is to expand our consciousness. In the Gita, Krishna is telling us, your job is to transcend the ego. Your job is to overcome this delusion, because only then can you help others overcome the delusion also. So that's what true service is. And there will always be people, very, very, probably much more competent, perhaps even than we are, of building hospitals and schools and serving on that level. But how many people, 1 in 1,000, are willing to work and do the self-effort to merge with that consciousness and then be channels of that consciousness on the planet? And that's what Christ was commending Mary for, and that's what Krishna is telling Arjuna to do, because no matter what we do after that, if we have done our dharma, if we have transcended our own ego consciousness and merged with the infinite and taking that vibration out into every aspect of our lives, we will be serving in the very highest way possible, and we'll be able to transform the consciousness of the planet. God bless you. We'll have our arati now. And at the end of the arati, like last week, will you please stay in the hall?